Welcome to the Pursuit Chronicles, where tales of adventure, discovery, and passion unfold through every inspiring journey. The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the old oak tree, its gnarled limbs clawing at the gray November sky. In the heart of Willow Creek, Iowa, a small town where time seemed to have stopped in the 1980s, stood a weathered farmhouse on the edge of a cornfield. Its white paint peeled like old skin, and the porch sagged under the weight of years. This was Evelyn Harper's home, a relic of better days, now as worn and solitary as the woman who lived within. Evelyn, 72, moved slowly through her kitchen, her hands trembling as she stirred a pot of thin vegetable soup. Her cough, a dry rasp, echoed in the quiet house. She wore a faded cardigan, its sleeves frayed, and her silver hair was pulled into a loose bun. The townsfolk of Willow Creek whispered about her, how she'd once owned half the county's farmland, how she'd been swindled by a slick Chicago investor, how her fortune had vanished overnight. They saw her at the general store, buying day-old bread and canned beans, her eyes distant, always glancing toward the rusted mailbox at the end of her gravel driveway. "She's waitin' for something," old Mrs. Callahan said at the diner, her voice low over a cup of coffee. "Or someone." Evelyn's life was a study in solitude. She ate alone at a wobbly table, the radio crackling with gospel hymns. She tended a small garden, though her strength waned with each passing season. At night, she sat by the window, staring at the road that stretched into the darkness, as if expecting headlights to pierce the gloom. The townsfolk pitied her, but they didn't know the half of it. Evelyn Harper was not what she seemed. She had 3 children, scattered across the country like seeds carried too far by the wind. First was Michael, 45, the eldest. He was the CEO of Harper Imports, a Chicago-based company that shipped exotic goods from Asia to high-end retailers. Michael lived in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, his days filled with board meetings and his nights with whiskey and regret. He hadn't been back to Willow Creek in a decade, not since the fight with his mother, the one nobody in town dared mention. His emails to Evelyn were curt, always signed Best M. Then there was Laura, 42, the middle child. She lived in a gated community outside Dallas, married to a real estate mogul named Richard. Laura's life was a performance. Perfect hair, designer clothes, charity galas where she smiled for the cameras. But behind the facade, her marriage was unraveling, Richard's temper flaring more with each passing month. Laura called her mother. Sporadically, her voice bright but hollow, promising visits she never made. Last was Sarah, 38, the youngest. A middle school teacher in a small town in Nebraska, Sarah lived in a modest apartment, her life as simple as her mother's. She was quiet, introspective, the only one who called Evelyn weekly, her voice soft over the crackling landline. "I'll come soon, Mom," she'd say, and Evelyn would hear the sincerity in her words. Sarah was the only one who hadn't inherited her mother's stubborn pride or her secrets. On a chilly Tuesday morning, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, a stack of yellowed stationery before her. Her hands, spotted with age, moved with purpose, as she wrote 3 letters, each in her careful cursive. The words were simple but heavy, each sentence a stone dropped into still water. "My dearest child, I am not long for this world. My heart is tired, and my days are few. I want one last meal with you, a chance to sit together as we once did. Come to Willow Creek this Sunday. It will be our last supper, with all my love." Mom, she sealed each envelope, her fingers lingering on the paper. She didn't cry, though her chest ached. This was no whim, no sentimental plea. Evelyn Harper had a plan, one she'd been crafting for years. She shuffled to the mailbox, her boots crunching on the frost-covered gravel, and slipped. The letters inside. The red flag went up, a small act of defiance against the loneliness that had settled into her bones. By Thursday, the letters had reached their destinations. In Chicago, Michael sat in his glass-walled office, the skyline glittering behind him. His assistant, a sharp young woman named Claire, dropped the envelope on his desk. "Personal mail," she said, raising an eyebrow. Michael frowned, slicing it open with a letter opener. He scanned the words, his jaw tightening. "She's being dramatic," he muttered, tossing the letter into a drawer. He had a crisis on his hands. His company was bleeding money, a bad deal with a supplier threatening to tank his stock. He couldn't afford a trip to Iowa, not now. He scribbled, "A note to Claire. Wire $5,000 to Mom's account. Tell her I'm tied up with meetings." In Dallas, Laura opened her letter at the marble island in her kitchen, her manicured nails trembling. She read it twice, her eyes welling up. "Oh, Mom," she whispered, clutching her phone. She dialed. Evelyn, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I love you so much, Mom, you know that, right? But I can't come. It's too far, and Richard, he wouldn't understand. And that house, it's so depressing." She hung up, sobbing, then poured herself a glass of Chardonnay. She told herself she'd visit soon, when things were better. In Nebraska, Sarah sat on her couch, the letter in her lap. Her apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the radiator. She read her mother's words, her heart sinking. Without hesitation, she called her principal, requesting 3 days off. "Family emergency," she said, her voice steady. By evening, she was packing a duffel bag, her bus ticket to Willow Creek tucked into her wallet. She didn't know why, but she felt a pull, an urgency she couldn't ignore. Back in Willow Creek, Evelyn waited. The sky darkened, clouds rolling in from the west, promising a storm. She dusted the dining table, set out 4 plates, and began chopping vegetables for a meal she hadn't cooked in years. The radio played softly, a hymn about redemption. Evelyn hummed along, her eyes sharp with purpose. Sunday was coming. And, with it, the truth. The Greyhound bus lurched along Highway 30, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt as rain began to fall. Sarah Harper sat by the window, her duffel bag wedged between her knees, watching the endless cornfields blur into a gray haze. The storm clouds had rolled in faster than the weatherman predicted, and the sky over Iowa was a bruise, heavy with the promise of trouble. Sarah's reflection stared back at her in the glass, pale, tired, her brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She clutched her mother's letter, the paper creased from rereading. "My days are few." Those words had lodged in her chest like a splinter. The bus was half empty, the other passengers a mix of college kids and drifters. An old man across the aisle snored, his cap slipping over his eyes. Sarah checked her phone. 3:17 p.m., Saturday. She'd be in Willow Creek by evening, assuming the storm didn't delay them. Her principal had been kind, granting the leave without question, but Sarah hadn't told her colleagues why she was going. She didn't want their pity, their well-meaning. Questions about her mother. Evelyn Harper wasn't just her mother. She was a puzzle, a woman who'd raised 3 children with iron will, only to retreat into silence after the incident. Nobody in Willow Creek talked about it directly, but the whispers followed Sarah every time she visited. 10 years ago, Evelyn had sold off most of her land to a Chicago developer named Vincent Crow. The deal was supposed to make her a millionaire, secure her retirement. Instead, Crow vanished with the money, and Evelyn was left with the farmhouse and a few acres. Michael had been furious, blaming her for trusting a stranger. Laura had cried, more for the lost inheritance than for her mother's pain. Sarah, barely 28 at the time, had stayed quiet, helping Evelyn pack up the family photos as the bank took the rest. Now, as the bus rattled through the storm, Sarah wondered what had prompted her mother's letter. Evelyn wasn't one for dramatics. The words felt like a summons, a test. Sarah leaned her head against the window, closing her eyes. She could still hear her mother's voice from their last call, frail but steady. "Come home, Sarah. Just you." In Willow Creek, Evelyn stood at her kitchen counter, her hands dusted with flour. The radio crackled with a severe weather warning, gusts up to 60 miles per hour, possible hail. She ignored it, kneading dough for cornbread, her movements slow but precise. The farmhouse smelled of simmering chicken stew, a recipe she hadn't made in years. 4 plates sat on the dining table, though she knew only one child would come. Michael's assistant had emailed yesterday a polite note about a busy schedule and a bank transfer. Laura had left a voicemail, her voice thick with tears but no promises. Only Sarah had called back, her words simple. "I'm on my way, Mom." Evelyn's eyes drifted to the backyard, where the rain was turning the garden to mud. Beyond the tomato vines stood a shed, its padlock rusted but intact. Nobody in town knew what was inside, not even nosy Mrs. Callahan, who'd once tried to peek through the slats. Evelyn's lips twitched, not quite a smile. She wasn't ready to open that door, not yet. A knock startled her. She wiped her hands on her apron and shuffled to the front door, peering through the lace curtain. Mrs. Callahan stood on the porch, her raincoat dripping, holding a Tupperware container. "Evelyn, you poor thing, out here all alone in this storm," the woman said, her voice syrupy with concern. "I brought you some casserole. You eatin' okay?" Evelyn opened the door, her face a mask of gratitude. "You're too kind, Martha. I'm fine, really. Sarah's comin' tonight." Mrs. Callahan's eyebrows shot up. "Sarah? Well, ain't that something? None of them kids been back in ages. You sure you're up for company with your cough and all?" "I'm sure," Evelyn said, her tone final. She took the casserole, thanked her neighbor, and closed the door before the woman could pry further. Mrs. Callahan lingered on the porch, glancing at the mailbox, then trudged back to her own house. Across the road, Evelyn set the casserole on the counter, unopened. She didn't need charity. She needed her children to remember who they were. The bus pulled into Willow Creek's tiny station at 6:45 p.m., the rain now a steady drumbeat. Sarah slung her bag over her shoulder and stepped onto the gravel lot, her sneakers soaking through instantly. The town looked smaller than she remembered, its main street lined with shuttered storefronts and a single blinking stoplight. She pulled up her hood and started the half-mile walk to the farmhouse, the wind pushing against her like a warning. By the time she reached the gravel driveway, her clothes were drenched, and her breath came in sharp gasps. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly through the storm. Sarah paused at the mailbox, its red flag still up, a stubborn sentinel in the rain. She climbed the porch steps, her heart pounding, and knocked. The door opened, and there was Evelyn, smaller than Sarah remembered, her cardigan swallowing her frame. Her eyes, though, were the same, sharp, gray, searching. "Sarah," she said, her voice breaking. "Mom." Sarah dropped her bag and hugged her, the dampness of her coat mingling with Evelyn's warmth. They stood there for a moment, the storm raging outside, the world shrinking to the space between them. "Come in, you're soaked," Evelyn said, pulling her inside. The kitchen was warm, the air thick with the scent of stew and cornbread. Sarah shed her coat, her eyes taking in the familiar, the chipped mugs on the counter, the quilt draped over the couch, the radio humming a hymn. But there was something else, a weight in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. "You didn't have to come," Evelyn said, handing her a towel. "Not in this weather." "I wanted to," Sarah said, drying her hair. "Your letter... it scared me." Evelyn turned away, stirring the stew. "No need for fear, just wanted to see my girl." Sarah watched her mother, noting the tremble in her hands, the way her shoulders hunched. "Are Michael and Laura coming?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Evelyn's lips tightened. "They're busy, you know how it is." Sarah nodded, swallowing the familiar ache. She'd always been the one to bridge the gap, to call her siblings, to keep the family tethered, but Michael was a stranger now, and Laura was too wrapped up in her own world. Sarah set the towel down and joined her mother at the counter. "What can I do?" Evelyn handed her a knife and a pile of carrots. "Chop these, like old times." They worked in silence, the rhythm of their movements a quiet duet. Sarah peeled and sliced, her mind drifting to childhood. Summers in the garden, Michael chasing her with a hose, Laura braiding her hair on the porch. Evelyn had been the center of it all, fierce and unyielding, working 2 jobs after their father died. But there were gaps in those memories, moments Sarah couldn't piece together. The fight with Michael, the sale of the land, the way Evelyn had changed after Crow disappeared. "Remember when we made peach cobbler?" Sarah said, breaking the silence. "You let me lick the spoon, and Michael got mad because he wanted it." Evelyn chuckled, a soft, rusty sound. "He was always jealous of you. Thought I loved you best, did you?" Sarah asked, half joking. Evelyn's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "I loved you all, still do. But love ain't always enough, is it?" Sarah didn't know how to answer. She focused on the carrots, the knife slipping through the orange flesh. The storm outside grew louder, the wind rattling the windows. A flash of lightning lit the kitchen, followed by a crack of thunder that made Sarah jump. "It's just a storm," Evelyn said, but her voice was tight. "We'll be fine." They finished preparing the meal, chicken stew, cornbread, green beans boiled with bacon, a pitcher of sweet tea. It was the kind of food Sarah hadn't eaten in years, the kind that tasted like home. Evelyn set the table, her hands lingering on each plate, as if memorizing its place. Sarah noticed the fourth setting, untouched, and felt a pang for her absent siblings. "Mom, why now?" she asked, unable to hold it in. "Why this dinner?" Evelyn sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "I'm old, Sarah. Older than I look. I want to see my children before I go. Is that so strange?" "No, but—" Sarah hesitated. "You don't seem sick. Not really." Evelyn's smile was faint, almost secretive. "You don't know everything." "About me, girl!" Before Sarah could press further, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, a text from Michael. "Heard you're with Mom. Tell her I sent money. Board meeting tomorrow. Can't make it." Sarah's jaw clenched. She typed a quick reply. "She deserves more than money," and silenced the phone. "Let's eat," Evelyn said, as if she hadn't noticed. They sat across from each other, the storm a constant roar outside. Sarah served the stew, the steam rising in soft curls. The cornbread was golden, crumbling under her fork. She took a bite, and the taste hit her like a memory. Warm, buttery, the way only her mother made it. Evelyn ate slowly, her eyes fixed on Sarah. "Tell me about your life," she said. "Your students, your dreams. I want to know." Sarah hesitated, then started talking. She told her about the kids in her 7th grade class, the boy who wrote poems in secret, the girl who wanted to be an astronaut. She talked about her apartment, her weekend hikes, the way she missed Willow Creek sometimes. Evelyn listened, her face softening, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a question she wasn't asking. When Sarah finished, Evelyn set her spoon down. "You're a good girl, Sarah, always were, but you carry too much." "Carry what?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp. "Us," Evelyn said simply. "Me, your brother, your sister. You been holding this family together since you were a child. Ain't fair, is it?" Sarah's throat tightened. She looked down at her plate, the stew blurring through unshed tears. "I don't mind," she lied. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand covering Sarah's. "You should. You deserve to live for you." The words hung between them, heavy and true. Sarah wanted to argue, to say she was fine, but the storm chose that moment to escalate. A gust of wind shook the house, and the lights flickered, plunging the kitchen into darkness. Sarah gasped, gripping her mother's hand. "It's all right," Evelyn said, her voice calm. "There's candles in the drawer." Sarah fumbled to the counter, her heart racing. She found a box of matches and a pair of taper candles, their wicks blackened from use. She lit them, setting them on the table. The flickering light cast shadows on the walls, turning the kitchen into something ancient, almost sacred. They resumed, eating, the candles painting their faces in soft gold. Evelyn began to talk, her voice low, almost a confession. "I wasn't always a good mother," she said. "I tried, but I made mistakes. After your daddy died, I worked myself to the bone. Thought money would keep us safe, but it didn't." "Did it?" Sarah leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "You did your best, Mom. We never went hungry." Evelyn shook her head. "I gave you food, clothes, a roof, but I didn't give you me. Not enough. And then, that man, Crow. I trusted him, and it cost us everything. Sarah's fork stilled. What happened with him? You never told us. Evelyn's eyes glistened in the candlelight. He promised me the world. Said he'd turn our land into something big. Hotels, shops, a future for you kids. I signed the papers, gave him the deeds. Next thing I knew, he was gone, and so was the money. I was too ashamed to fight it. Too proud to ask for help. Sarah reached for her mother's hand again, anger flaring in her chest. It wasn't your fault. He was a thief. Maybe, Evelyn said, her voice distant, but I should have known better. Should have protected you. The storm roared louder, a branch snapping somewhere outside. Sarah glanced at the window, the rain a silver sheet against the glass. She wanted to ask more, to dig into the past, but Evelyn's expression stopped her. There was something guarded there, something she wasn't ready to share. They finished the meal in near silence, the candles burning low. Sarah cleared the plates, her mind churning. She thought of Michael's text, Laura's absence, the empty chairs at the table. She thought of her mother's letter, the weight of it. Our last supper. As she washed the dishes, Evelyn stood, moving to the back door. She stared out at the yard, the shed barely visible through the rain. There's things you don't know, Sarah, she said almost to herself. Things I've kept from you. Sarah dried her hands, her stomach twisting. What things? Evelyn turned, her face half in shadow. Tomorrow, she said. I'll show you tomorrow. The lights flickered back on, harsh and bright, breaking the spell. Sarah blinked, her heart pounding. She wanted to push, to demand answers, but the exhaustion in her mother's face stopped her. Let's get some rest, Evelyn said, her voice soft again. Storm's not letting up, Sarah nodded, following her mother to the guest room, where a quilted bed waited. She lay down, the rain a steady drumbeat against the roof. Sleep came slowly, her dreams filled with locked doors and her mother's voice whispering secrets she couldn't hear. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving Willow Creek battered, but still standing. Sarah woke to the sound of dripping water, the farmhouse creaking like an old ship. Sunlight streamed through the guest room's cracked window, pale and cold, illuminating the quilt that smelled faintly of her childhood. She lay still, her mind tangled with the previous night, the candle-lit dinner, her mother's cryptic words, the shed looming in the rain-soaked yard. Something was coming, something Evelyn had kept buried for years. Sarah pulled on her jeans and a sweater, her sneakers, still damp from the trek through the storm. She found Evelyn in the kitchen, already dressed, her cardigan swapped for a sturdy jacket. The radio was off, the silence heavy. A pot of coffee bubbled on the stove, its aroma grounding the morning's strangeness. Evelyn stood at the sink, washing the last of the dishes, her movements deliberate as if preparing for a ritual. "Morning, Mom," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. Evelyn turned, her gray eyes catching the light. "Morning, girl. Sleep okay?" "Well enough." Sarah hesitated, glancing at the back door. "You said you'd show me something today." Evelyn nodded, drying her hands on a dish towel. "I did, but first coffee and breakfast." Sarah wanted to protest, to demand answers, but the set of her mother's jaw stopped her. She sat at the table, accepting a mug of black coffee and a plate of toast with butter. The simplicity of it, the warm bread, the bitter coffee, felt like an anchor. Outside, the world was a mess. Fallen branches littered the yard, the garden was a muddy ruin, and the shed's roof had lost a shingle. But inside, it was just the two of them, mother and daughter, suspended in a moment that felt both fragile and eternal. They ate in silence, the only sound the clink of porcelain. Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter, but she ignored it. She knew it was Michael or Laura, probably checking in now that the storm had passed. Their guilt surfacing too. Late. Evelyn seemed to sense it too, her eyes flicking to the phone, then back to her plate. When they finished, Evelyn stood, her chair scraping the floor. "Come with me," she said, her voice low but firm. Sarah followed her to the back door, grabbing her jacket. The air outside was sharp, the ground slick with mud. The shed stood at the far end of the yard, its weathered wood glistening in the morning light. Evelyn walked toward it, her steps steady despite her age, a key dangling from her hand. Sarah's pulse quickened. She'd always assumed the shed held tools or junk, nothing more. But the way Evelyn moved, the weight in her silence, told a different story. At the shed, Evelyn paused, her hand on the padlock. "You ever wonder why I stayed here, Sarah? After everything?" Sarah frowned. "I thought you had no choice. After Crow took the money." Evelyn's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Crow didn't take anything, not really." Before Sarah could process the words, Evelyn unlocked the padlock and swung the door open. The shed was dim, smelling of earth and rust. A tarp covered something in the corner, and a metal safe sat against the back wall, its surface scratched, but solid. Evelyn knelt beside it, her fingers working the combination with practiced ease. The lock clicked and she lifted the lid, revealing a stack of documents, a velvet pouch, and a single brass key. Sarah's breath caught. "Mom, what is this?" Evelyn stood, holding the brass key. "Follow me, there's more." They left the shed, Evelyn leading the way across the yard, past the farmhouse, to a narrow path Sarah hadn't noticed before. It wound through a copse of trees, their branches heavy with storm-damp leaves. The path opened to a clearing, and there, hidden from the road, stood a cottage. Small, modern, its white siding pristine, its windows gleaming. A gravel drive led to a garage, and a flower bed bloomed with late-season chrysanthemums. It was beautiful, out of place, like something from a dream. Sarah stopped, her mouth open. "What? How?" Evelyn unlocked the cottage door and stepped inside, gesturing for Sarah to follow. The interior was warm, furnished simply but elegantly. A leather sofa, a oak dining table, a kitchen with granite counters. A framed photo sat. On the mantel, Evelyn with her 3 children, years ago, smiling in the farmhouse yard. "Sit," Evelyn said, pointing to the sofa. Sarah obeyed, her mind reeling. Evelyn sat across from her, the brass key still in her hand. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Sarah's. "I never lost the money, Sarah," she said. "Not a dime." Sarah blinked, the words not registering. "But, Crow, the land, you said—" "I lied," Evelyn cut in, her voice steady. "Vincent Crow was real, but he wasn't a swindler. He was a friend, a lawyer I hired to stage the whole thing. I sold the land, yes, but the money went into a trust. This cottage, the farmhouse, everything, it's all paid for. I've got millions, Sarah, always have." Sarah's hands clenched, her heart pounding. "Why? Why pretend to be poor? Why let us think you were suffering?" Evelyn leaned forward, her face etched with something between sorrow and resolve. "Because I needed to know who you were, all of you, Michael, Laura, you. I gave you everything when you were young, worked myself to death to make sure you had a future. But I saw what it did to you. Michael got greedy, Laura got vain, and you got stuck carrying their weight. I had to know if you loved me for me, not for what I could give you." Sarah's throat burned, tears pricking her eyes. "You tested us? All these years, you let us believe you were alone, sick, broke?" "Wasn't alone," Evelyn said softly. "I had you, your calls, your letters. You never stopped, Sarah, even when you thought I had nothing. Michael sent checks, Laura sent tears, but you gave me your time. That's what I was waiting for." Sarah stood pacing the room, her emotions a tangle of anger and grief. She thought of the farmhouse, its peeling paint and sagging porch. She thought of her mother's cough, the thin soup, the way she'd stared at the mailbox. All of it a performance, a trap. "That's cruel, Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "You lied to us. To me." Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "Maybe it was, but the truth ain't always kind. I lost your father when you were kids, and I swore I'd raise you right. But money changed us, Sarah. It changed me. I had to strip it away to see what was left." Sarah sank back onto the sofa, her hands covering her face. Memories flooded her, Evelyn working nights at the diner, sewing their clothes, teaching them to plant seeds in the garden. She remembered the fight with Michael, his voice raised in the farmhouse kitchen, accusing Evelyn of throwing away their future. She remembered Laura's tears, her refusal to visit after the bankruptcy, claiming the town was too depressing. And she remembered her own quiet loyalty, the weekly calls, the guilt of living so far away. "Why now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why tell me now?" Evelyn reached into her jacket, pulling out an envelope. It was sealed, addressed to "My children," in her careful cursive. She set it on the coffee table, her hand trembling. "Because I'm tired," she said, "and because you passed the test." Sarah stared at the envelope, her stomach twisting. "What's in it?" Evelyn's smile was faint, almost sad. "My will, and a letter. It says everything I couldn't say out loud. The money, the cottage, the land, it's yours, Sarah. Not because you're better than your brother or sister, but because you remembered what matters. You came when I called." Sarah shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't want it. I didn't come for money." "I know," Evelyn said, her voice soft. "That's why it's yours." The room fell silent, the weight of the truth settling between them. Sarah wanted to argue, to reject the gift, but she saw the exhaustion in her mother's face, the years of planning and pain. Evelyn had orchestrated this moment, not out of malice, but out of love, a desperate, flawed love that had cost them all. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, wiping her eyes. Evelyn stood, moving to the window. The clearing outside was peaceful, the storm's damage hidden by the trees. "We live," she said. "You and me, here. The cottage is big enough for two, and I want to do something. With the rest, make this place a home for others, a shelter maybe. Willow Creek could use it." Sarah nodded, the idea sparking something in her chest. She thought of her students, the ones who needed more than a classroom. She thought of the town, its quiet struggles, its forgotten corners. Maybe this was what her mother had always wanted, not just a test, but a legacy. They spent the morning in the cottage, Evelyn showing Sarah the paperwork. Bank statements, property deeds, a trust fund worth more than Sarah could fathom. It was overwhelming, almost absurd, but Evelyn's calm certainty grounded her. They talked, really talked, for the first time in years, about the past, the future, the family they'd lost. Evelyn shared stories Sarah had never heard. Her courtship with their father, her dreams of being a painter, the night she decided to stage the bankruptcy. By noon, the sound of tires on gravel broke their reverie. Sarah looked out the window, her heart sinking. A black SUV and a sleek convertible were pulling into the farmhouse drive, Michael and Laura together, their faces grim. "They're here," Sarah said, her voice tight. Evelyn's expression hardened. "Let 'em come!" They walked back to the farmhouse, the air thick with anticipation. Michael was already on the porch, his suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. Laura stood beside him, her designer coat out of place in the muddy yard, her makeup smudged from crying. "Mom," Michael said, his voice sharp. "What the hell's going on? Sarah called me last night, said you were sick. Then I get a text from Mrs. Callahan about some secret house." Laura stepped forward, her hands wringing. "We were worried, Mom. Why didn't you tell us you were—" "Okay, why all this drama?" Evelyn stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. "You weren't worried enough to come yesterday, were you?" Michael's jaw clenched. "I have a company to run. I sent money—" "Money ain't love," Evelyn snapped, her voice cutting through the air. "You think a check makes up for 10 years of silence?" Laura burst into tears, her voice shrill. "That's not fair. I called. I tried. But you shut us out, Mom. You made us think you were broken." Sarah watched, her heart aching. She wanted to defend her siblings, to soften the blow, but Evelyn's words echoed in her mind. "You carry too much." She stayed silent, letting the moment unfold. Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "I shut you out to see if you'd come back. Sarah did. You didn't. That's the difference." Michael's face reddened. "So what? This was some kind of test? You played us, Mom? For what?" "For the truth," Evelyn said, her voice steady. She pulled the envelope from her jacket, holding it out. This is my will. Everything, money, land, the cottage, goes to Sarah. Not because I love her more, but because she loved me when I had nothing," Laura gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Michael stared at the envelope, his fists clenching. "You're punishing us," he said, his voice low. "After everything we've been through, you're cutting us out." "You cut yourselves out," Evelyn said, her tone final. "You've got your lives, your money, your pride. Sarah's got a heart. That's what I'm leaving behind." The siblings stood frozen, the weight of their choices crashing down. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mom, there's still family. There's enough for all of us." Evelyn shook her head. "No, Sarah. This ain't about splitting things even. It's about what's right." Michael turned away, his shoulders rigid, and walked back to his SUV. Laura lingered, her sobs quieting, then followed, her heels sinking into the mud. The engines roared, and they were gone, leaving only dust and silence. Sarah turned to her mother, tears streaming down her face. "Was it worth it, Mom? Breaking us like this?" Evelyn's face softened, her hand reaching for Sarah's. "I didn't break us, girl. I showed us who we are. And you're the best of me." Weeks later, the cottage was transformed. Evelyn and Sarah worked with the town to turn it into a community center, a place for families in need, for kids with nowhere to go. Sarah took a leave from teaching, moving into the cottage with her mother. They lived simply, cooking together, tending the garden, their bond a quiet strength. The farmhouse was sold, the money added to the trust for the center. Evelyn's cough eased, her health steadier than Sarah had expected. The town buzzed with talk, but Evelyn didn't care. She'd found what she'd been searching for, a daughter who stayed, a purpose that lasted. One evening, as they sat on the cottage porch watching the sunset over the cornfields, Sarah pulled out the envelope Evelyn had given her. She hadn't opened it, hadn't needed to. But now, with the sky painted gold, she broke the seal. The letter inside was short, written in Evelyn's steady hand. "My children, money buys a lot, but it don't buy love. I gave you all I had, and I asked for one thing in return. A meal, a moment, a piece of your heart. Sarah gave me that. The rest is hers, not to keep, but to share. Don't hate her for it. Hate yourselves if you must, but then let it go. Live better, love better. That's all I ever wanted." Mom Sarah folded the letter, her eyes on the horizon. "You think they'll read it?" she asked. Evelyn shrugged, her smile wistful. "Maybe, someday, but we've got today." They sat there, the world quiet around them, the Last Supper a memory that held them close. Thank you for joining the Pursuit Chronicles. Keep chasing your dreams and explore new horizons with us.